Hi students, it's your friend Pete sitting here in my office once again, getting ready to describe to you guys the next assignment. That is the research design. The research design is really the most researchy chunk of the proposal, and what I mean by that is where in your introduction you use a lot of more informal conversational language. In the research design part of the proposal, you really have to use appropriate researchy vocabulary. Because of that, the first thing I want to remind you to do is to review chapters 5 through 9 of the Macmillan text. Those chapters all talk about the component parts of the research design or the methods section of the proposal, and they'll be very helpful for you as you seek to get that vocabulary under your belt a little bit. The research design, as usual, there's no length requirement for it. In the past, I think students have gone between about 8 and 12 pages with the research design. If you can do it in less space than that, go for it. If you need to take a little bit more space than that, that's fine too. Basically, if you hit all of the high notes on the assignment description that I've posted for you on Blackboard, then it doesn't really matter to me how long it is. Don't talk yourself into a corner. One thing that I tend to do when I write is use so many big words and so much vocabulary that I write for way too long and could have gotten the job done with much fewer words, with far fewer words. So anyway, don't fall into that trap. Be parsimonious and say just as many words as are necessary to get the job done. As usual, I want your assignment submitted in Word format, not PDF format, so that I can insert my comments and do track changes to make corrections and suggestions for improvement. So anyway, use Word, not PDF. Type it in Times New Roman, 12 size, and keep your margins at 1 inch. Some of the default settings, depending on how you got your computer set up, sometimes by default your margins are set up for 1 1/4 inches. So change those and make sure that you have 1 inch margins. That's just the APA thing. Okay, so the research design has 6 major sections, and I just want to tell you a little bit about each of those briefly while I got you. The first is the overview of the proposed study, and while I want you to submit that as part of the research design this time around, when you submit your proposal, the overview of the proposed study will actually show up at the very end of the literature review. The reason why I include it in this assignment is because it has a lot more to do with the methods section than it does to do with the literature review. So anyway, that's the beginning. What you want to do in this overview of the proposed study is explain what research design you're going to use. What I mean by that is tell me if it's going to be true experimental, quasi-experimental, comparative, descriptive, whatever. I also want you to identify your independent and dependent variables, and if it's appropriate, state your hypothesis. What I mean by if it's appropriate is that in some instances, depending on the research design that you're going to employ, stating hypotheses may or may not be appropriate. So review chapters, I think it's 8 and 9 in Macmillan, to find out whether or not your methodology, your research design, is going to be one where you're going to need to include hypotheses. Alright, so that's the overview. The second section is for subjects or participants. I prefer the word participants because subjects sounds a little bit too scientific, like I got lab rats and I'm dissecting their brains. It just sounds a little bit too clinical for me, so I always use participants. Some people prefer subjects, so just choose whichever you want. The first thing you want to do in this section is provide me with demographic details about your participants or subjects. Talk about the number of the subjects, and then tell me about your sampling and grouping strategies. Okay, next is the measures section. The measures that you're going to use are going to be the tools that are actually going to give you the data that you're going to analyze in the future to find your results. So I want a subsection for each measure that you're going to use. So if you're going to use the Virginia SOL as one of the measures that you're going to use, write me a brief section on that. If you're going to design a measure of your own, you don't have to include the entire measure, but it would be helpful for you to include some sample items for me and talk about your sources of inspiration for the measure that you're creating yourself. Also, and this is important, don't forget to address the validity and reliability of the measures that you're going to employ in your study. Okay, so we've got the overview, the participants, and the measures. Next comes procedures. Procedures is really close to a recipe. Your procedures section should just outline step by step exactly what you're going to do to conduct a study. And it should be so clear that somebody with little knowledge of the subject area or anything could replicate your study or do it all over in exactly the same way that you did. So the more specific you can be in your procedures, the better. This is the part that can get very verbose and lengthy, so don't feel bad if you end up writing 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pages on procedures, because that's normally the longest bit. Okay, next comes data analysis. Now, I know we haven't gone over anything yet in the way of statistics for this class, and so some of your backgrounds will vary. Some of you know a lot about statistics and some of you don't know very much at all. Don't be too scared about this section. I know that some of you don't have very extensive backgrounds in statistics, and so I'm not going to be super rigorous in my grading of this section. What I want you to do is use your intuition. In a way, we're all researchers, whether we like it or not, and our intuition has led us to be successful in whatever field we're working in. Most of us are educators. And your intuition won't steer you wrong in this case. So when you're writing data analysis, use your math and statistics knowledge to the best of your ability, but don't feel bad if you don't know all the terms like chi-square and paired samples t-test and etc., etc. Just use your intuition to come up with the best statistical procedures that you can think of. And again, I'm not going to be too much of a stickler about that. Chapter 6 in Macmillan is really important in terms of the statistics piece, so check that out in order to get your vocabulary up to speed. Alright, so those are the 5 sections. The 6th is probably my favorite to write in papers of my own, and that's limitations. In the limitations section of your method, you're going to talk about all the various threats to internal and external validity and reliability that your design poses. Okay? So I know this sounds bad. Basically what you're going to be doing is talking about everything that's wrong with your proposed study. And it does sound threatening, but remember, limitations are only bad if you don't discuss them. Okay, so talk about all these limitations and do so fairly and overtly. Come out with all of the things that could be flaws with your research design and just discuss them. Okay, I understand that you're going to do the best that you can to have a valid and reliable study, just like I do. But every time there are always problems that are inherent to any research design. If you check out my PowerPoints on experimental and non-experimental designs, you'll see a lot of these threats discussed. And if you listen to the lectures, you'll hear them discussed too. So find out what threats are present in your study and discuss them fairly. The worst thing that you can do is avoid discussing a limitation, because in the past when I've done something like that and haven't talked about a limitation in my study, I've gone to a conference and presented my paper in front of a big group of people that are way smarter than me. And they're smart enough to know when these threats are present, even if I don't talk about them. And so what they'll do is just rip you a new one because you haven't talked about them in advance. Whereas if you just are open and upfront about the threats to your study, no one will have anything to say to you because the assumption of good faith is there. They know you're trying the best you can. Alright, so that's it. Those are the 6 sections: the overview, the participants, the measures, the procedures, the data analysis, and the limitations. So as long as you hit all of those 6 pieces, you're going to be doing just fine. I do have a few helpful hints for you. Remember to write in the future tense. Since you're just proposing this study, you haven't done any of it yet. So talk about stuff that you're going to do, not stuff that you've already done. The idea of writing a methods section or research design section can be really intimidating to people who haven't done it before, so I'll encourage you to review some articles that you read for your lit review assignment and go back and see how those authors dealt with their methods section. It'll give you a good idea of ways to transition between sections, and it'll also inform your vocabulary a little bit more too and give you a better idea of what people are saying in each of these subsections. Okay, last but not least, submit a draft to me, please. I like reading your drafts, and I think that my feedback's been helpful for a lot of you. So send me a draft in advance of the due date. While I'm thinking about it, the due date is actually going to be the 30th of July. But as usual, you can submit it any time in the weekend following that due date. Just so long as it's in my box on Monday morning, I won't complain.